Welcome in, everyone. We are genuinely thrilled to have you with us today. I'm your host for the session.
And I'll be your expert guide for today's discussion.
Right. So anyone who's, familiar with the traditional Exodus narrative, you already know the historical stakes here.
Yeah, the plagues, the parting of the sea.
Exactly. The literal escape from a literal pharaoh holding a whip. But for this deep dive, we are looking at a piece of source material that it completely strips away the physical geography of that story.
It really does. It's quite a departure.
Yeah. We are diving into excerpts from Motte-Guyon's The Inward Exodus,
Yeah.
Finding God Through Self-Abandonment.
Right.
And what she does is she reads the first 2 chapters of Exodus exclusively as a psychological and spiritual roadmap.
Completely internal.
Yes. For her, Egypt is not a place on a map. It is the landscape of the human soul.
It is a radical reframing. I mean, truly radical. We are talking about a 17th century French mystic who looked at one of the most foundational historical texts in human history.
And just saw something else entirely.
Right. She saw this intricate allegory for the mind's internal architecture.
Yeah.
But before we get into the actual mechanics of her framework, I really want to establish our baseline for today's discussion.
That's a good idea, yeah.
We are exploring this strictly as a profound piece of mystical literature and philosophical thought. Our role here is to act as impartial guides to Motte-Guyon's very specific and honestly often challenging interpretations.
Very challenging, yeah.
Right. We are going to examine the gears of her philosophy without taking sides. We are not endorsing a specific religious doctrine, and we are definitely not wading into modern political or theological debates here.
No, not at all.
The original material carries deep implications, obviously, but our job is to map out her thought process. We want to understand the ideas contained in the text exactly as she presented them.
And I think that impartial approach is, it's vital here because her framework is absolutely going to challenge a lot of modern sensibility.
Oh, without a doubt.
But it raises a really compelling question for you, the listener. Like, why spend an hour wrestling with a metaphorical interpretation of a biblical text by a mystic from the 1600s?
Hey, it's a fair question to ask.
Right. Well, if we look past the specific theological vocabulary she uses, the core human experiences she is describing are universally recognizable.
They really are. It's that friction.
Exactly. Think about the friction between the infinite scope of your own consciousness and the finite demands of existing in a physical body. Have you ever felt that psychological weight of the mundane? Have you ever felt a deep, almost transcendent sense of purpose, only to find yourself utterly crushed the next day by the relentless gravity of your daily responsibilities?
I think we all have, yeah.
Or perhaps, most terrifyingly, have you ever confronted the absolute necessity of letting go of control when your life feels like it's completely adrift?
Yeah, that's the core of it.
Even if you don't consider yourself spiritual in any way, her exploration of confronting internal resistance, enduring the crushing weight of circumstance, and the raw terror of true surrender is going to resonate deeply.
That friction between the infinite and the finite is exactly where her entire philosophy lives.
Yeah.
Guyon was writing during a period when the institutional structures of her world demanded very strict outward compliance.
Right, 17th century France.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yet she was charting a course for an intense, unmediated internal experience. So when she looks at the beginning of Exodus, she doesn't see ancient geopolitics at all.
No.
She sees a mirror of the individual psyche struggling to break free from the gravity of its own ego and the demands of the material world.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are jumping right into the beginning of her analysis, focusing on the first chapter of Exodus, verses 8 through 14.
Right, setting the stage.
The historical narrative sets the scene perfectly. A new king arises over Egypt, one who did not know Joseph. This new pharaoh looks at the Israelites and realizes they are growing stronger and far more numerous than the Egyptians.
And this is where the pivot happens.
Yeah, Guyon steps in right here and makes her first major philosophical pivot. For her, the Israelites are a living, breathing metaphor.
They represent the collective.
Right. They represent the collective body of individuals who are being called to what she terms the inward path, the path of totally abandoning yourself to the divine. And she identifies a very specific, almost uncompromising pattern that anyone on this path will experience. She argues that at the very inception of this spiritual journey, an individual is flooded with an immense, almost blinding joy.
A profound clarity.
Yes, an unearthly clarity. But that joy is an anomaly. And it is inevitably fundamentally followed by severe, crushing oppression.
And she doesn't present this as just a possibility,
Right.
She presents it as an absolute certainty. The very architecture of her thought demands this exact sequence.
How so?
Well, she draws a parallel to the time of Joseph, noting that there was a period when no nation on earth was stronger or more prosperous than the Israelites. They had the absolute best of Egypt at their fingertips.
Right. They were thriving.
Exactly. In her framework, this mirrors the initial phase of the inward life. When an individual first awakens to this deeper reality or first tastes that profound psychological and spiritual connection, they experience what she describes as a heavenly blessing.
It's a honeymoon phase.
Very much so. It is a period of pure, unspeakable joy where everything just makes sense, where the ego feels light and the world feels perfectly alive.
When it drops off.
Right. Then the environment turns hostile.
I struggle with this part, to be honest.
Why is that?
Well, why does the environment have to turn hostile? If someone achieves this beautiful state of clarity and joy, why does her framework insist that a new pharaoh has to arrive and crush it? It feels almost, punitive.
It is a totally valid reaction to feel that it's punitive. Especially from a modern perspective where we view happiness as the ultimate goal and suffering as an error in the system.
Exactly. If I'm suffering, I'm doing something wrong.
Right. But Quietism views this oppression not as an error, and certainly not as arbitrary cruelty. It is a mechanical necessity for true transformation.
A mechanical necessity.
Yes. In her view, the initial joy is granted to prove to the individual that this higher state exists. It's a taste of the destination.
Okay, that makes sense.
But if you stay in that state of joy, you become attached to the feeling of joy rather than the source of it. Your ego co-opts the spiritual experience.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you start thinking, look how enlightened I am. Look how peaceful I feel.
So the joy becomes a trap.
Precisely. So the joy must be stripped away. The crushing oppression that follows is designed to test your faithfulness when all the good feelings just evaporate.
That's intense.
It is. She cites Jesus as the primary archetypal model for this trajectory. He is presented as the first one predestined to undergo this exact sequence, willingly leaving a state of absolute joy to become the most oppressed of all. He acts as the ultimate blueprint for anyone who truly wants to abandon their ego.
So if you are walking this inward path, you aren't just reading about that divine blueprint, you are actively being molded into a replica of it.
You're living it.
Which forces us to look at how she redefines the destination itself. In the traditional story, the Israelites are enduring this oppression because they are trying to get to the promised land.
Right, a physical place.
Yeah, we usually conceptualize that as a location flowing with milk and honey, a utopia you can locate on a map. But Guyon strips the geography out entirely. She asks what this good land actually is, and her answer is breathtakingly simple. It's possessing God.
Exactly. The destination is not a change in circumstance. It is a fundamental change in being.
A change in me.
It is the ultimate union with the divine, a state of total, unbroken presence. But getting there requires navigating the agents of oppression. And this is where her psychological mapping becomes incredibly sharp.
Yeah, let's talk about the taskmasters.
In the historical text, you have Pharaoh and his literal taskmasters wielding physical whips. In Guyon's inward exodus, these oppressors are forces that act upon the mind and the spirit.
They aren't just guys with whips anymore.
No. They represent human oppressors in your life, societal pressures, psychological demons, and even the chaotic forces of nature itself. They are the mechanisms of friction designed to force the individual into exhausting, relentless labor, basically burying their internal life under the weight of external demands.
Let's ground this in everyday reality for a second, because her description of this labor is remarkably prescient for us today.
It really hits home.
It does. She talks about the Israelites being forced to work with mud and bricks, slaving away in the fields. She argues that for someone called to the inward path, the most agonizing persecution isn't necessarily physical violence. It is watching your finite life, your precious time and energy, be entirely consumed by the mundane affairs of the world.
The daily grind.
Exactly. It's the friction between knowing you have this profound internal calling, having tasted that transcendent joy we talked about, and then waking up on a Tuesday morning realizing you still have to pay your mortgage.
Answer 100 emails.
Right. mediate a bitter family conflict, and spend 10 hours a day performing rote mechanical chores just to survive.
It is the psychological despair of the mundane.
Despair of the mundane, that's a great way to put it.
The individual is acutely aware that their current labor is merely of the earth, as she puts it. They feel their inner vitality being drained by the mud and the bricks of daily existence, yet they are completely helpless to escape it.
You were just trapped in the mud.
And Guyon observed a profound psychological dynamic here. The enemy, the worldly mindset, actually mocks the individual.
Mockery, really.
Yes, society constantly demands that you justify your existence through visible earthly productivity. The malice of a worldly-minded society towards someone who values contemplation and inward silence is a constant grinding trial.
Because it doesn't produce capital.
Exactly. Society views the inward life as useless, and it applies pressure to force you back into the machinery of material production.
But the truly fascinating part of her framework is the counter-reaction to all this pressure. The oppressors, whether they are societal expectations or internal anxieties, they believe that by piling on the mud and the bricks, they can extinguish that inner light.
They think exhaustion will win.
Right. They think they can smother the inward life through sheer exhaustion. But Guyon introduces this striking botanical metaphor. She observes that the more these individuals are oppressed, the more the inward life actually multiplies and strengthens. She compares the believer to a palm tree.
The palm tree analogy is crucial for understanding her view of spiritual resilience.
Break that down for us.
Well, unlike most trees that might bend or snap under immense weight or fierce winds, a palm tree has a completely different structural integrity. The more pressure that is applied to it, the taller and straighter it grows.
That is so counterintuitive.
It is. Guyon is arguing that true spiritual life is fundamentally anti-fragile. The persecution, the mundane exhaustion, the mockery, none of it destroys the root system of the inward path.
It actually feeds it.
Exactly. In fact, the pressure itself acts as the catalyst that forces the individual to rely less on their own fragile ego and more on the deep, unshakable source of their being. The oppression is the very thing that makes them grow straight up.
It just completely flips the script on how we view adversity. We typically think of pressure as a flattening force, something that crushes us.
Right.
But she is saying that for the true inward life, pressure is the defining mechanism of growth.
It's required.
However, this general oppression, the endless mud and bricks, that's only the first phase. The resistance to the inward path doesn't stay passive. It escalates into a targeted eradication campaign.
And this shift in the narrative takes us into the deeper waters of her allegory.
What's fascinating here is how the architecture of the oppression adapts. Pharaoh realizes that the general labor isn't working. The people are still multiplying. They're still growing like palm trees.
Right, the mud isn't enough.
So he pivots to a highly specific surgical strike. He summons the Hebrew midwives, Shifra and Puah, and issues an absolutely horrific decree. He commands them that when they are attending to the Hebrew women in childbirth, if the baby is a boy, they must kill him. But if the baby is a girl, they are to let her live.
Now, obviously, on a historical and literal level, this is an account of attempted genocide.
Unquestionably.
But we have to remember we are operating strictly within Guyon's allegorical matrix today. And the way she maps gender onto this psychological landscape is highly specific, completely metaphorical, and frankly, a bit jarring to our modern ears until you see what she's actually getting at.
Yeah, it can sound really strange at first.
It has absolutely nothing to do with biological sex. In her framework, the boys represent a specific archetype of believer. They are the brave souls, and she explicitly notes this includes both men and women, who possess the courage to boldly and recklessly abandon themselves to the unfathomable workings of the divine.
They are the ones actually walking the radical inward path.
Yes, and conversely, the girls, in this metaphor, represent an entirely different archetype. They represent individuals who are weak.
But we have to define weak carefully here.
Exactly. We have to define weak according to her specific philosophical lexicon. It doesn't mean physically frail. It means individuals who are deeply rooted in self-love and self-interest.
Ah, self-interest.
They are the people who want the comfort of religion or spirituality, but are entirely unwilling to embrace the hardships, the ego death, or the profound surrender required by the cross.
They want the benefits without the cost.
Right. They are attached to their own standing, their own reputations, and their own sense of control. So Pharaoh's decree to kill the boys and spare the girls is an allegorical mandate.
A mandate to destroy the radical ones.
Yes. Destroy anyone attempting to walk the path of true, terrifying self-abandonment, but preserve, encourage, and tolerate those who practice a safe, sanitized, self-interested form of spirituality.
This is where Jeanne drops one of the most explosive insights in her entire commentary. We really have to ask, who exactly are the Egyptians carrying out this psychological execution in her metaphor? Who is actively trying to kill the newborns, the people just starting to awaken to the true inward path?
You'd think it would be the secular world.
Right. You would naturally assume she means secular society or atheists or obviously corrupt politicians, but she points the finger in a completely different direction. She argues that the fiercest oppressors of the inward life are often the supposedly enlightened ones.
Religious leaders.
Yes, the religious establishment itself.
It is a devastating institutional critique. She compares these religious figures to the princes of the earth. These are people who have been appointed as shepherds of souls. Their entire stated purpose is to guide people toward the divine.
That's their job description.
Exactly. Yet Guyon observes that they consistently and systematically oppress those who actually achieve a genuine, unmediated inward connection. And the truly terrifying aspect of her analysis is that she believes these leaders think they are doing a good thing.
They think they're the good guys.
They believe they are protecting the flock by snuffing out these unpredictable mystics.
I want to push on this because it seems so counterintuitive. Why would the religious establishment, the people who dedicated their entire lives to spiritual matters, be the ones trying to destroy a deep inward connection with God? What is the psychological threat there?
The psychological threat is control, and Guyon dissects this brilliantly. She explains that institutional leaders are incredibly comfortable with the girls in her metaphor.
The safe ones.
Right. They prefer the people who are living safely, who follow the rules, who donate to the institution, and who do not fully, radically dedicate themselves to an unmediated relationship with the divine.
Why is that?
Because predictable, self-interested religion does not challenge the status quo. It operates within a system of merit and hierarchy that the leaders themselves control. But when an individual completely abandons themselves to the inward path, they become entirely unpredictable to the institution.
They bypass the hierarchy.
Exactly. They no longer rely on the middleman. They become strong in a way that human hierarchies cannot manage or monetize. Guyon argues a profound psychological truth here. Self-interested love cannot tolerate the generosity of pure love. A religious system built on mechanics, control, and ego is existentially threatened by someone operating from a place of pure, self-abandoning surrender.
Because it completely destabilizes their authority. If the divine is dwelling perfectly within the abandoned soul, the soul doesn't need the institution to validate its existence anymore.
Precisely.
Guyon even echoes Jesus' rebuke of the religious scholars of his time, noting that they do not enter the kingdom themselves and they actively hinder those who are trying to enter. They are essentially blocking the door.
They are gatekeepers.
So, Pharaoh, representing this worldly institutional power, gives the midwives the order to kill the inward life at birth. But the narrative tells us the midwives feared God and refused to execute the decree. They let the brave souls, the boys, live.
It's an act of pure defiance.
And Guyon's analysis of the fallout from this decision introduces one of the most vital concepts in her entire philosophy.
She observes a fascinating dynamic in spiritual warfare here. She notes that those who are hired or pressured by the establishment to force true believers off the path often end up being converted by the very people they are supposed to destroy.
That's an amazing turnaround.
It is. The midwives possess simple, gentle hearts. When confronted with the reality of pure, innocent spiritual life, they just couldn't destroy it. They recognized the divine in the boys and chose to protect them, totally defying the institutional mandate.
And because of this profound act of courage, the text says God rewarded them. But the specific language used for this reward is highly unusual.
Very unusual.
He says God made them houses.
God made them houses.
Let's really look at what she means by that. Because if you read that literally, it sounds like God gave them prime real estate for doing a good deed.
Right, like a literal mansion.
Exactly. But in the architecture of the inward life, receiving a house is a massive paradigm shift.
It represents a fundamental transition in how an individual operates in the world. Guyon explains that when God made them houses, it means the divine took over their spiritual architecture. God moved them from what she calls the active path to the passive path.
We need to spend some time here because this distinction between the active and passive paths is the hinge upon which her entire framework swings. This goes against almost everything modern self-help and even modern spirituality teaches us.
It absolutely does. In her taxonomy, the active path characterizes how almost all of us begin our spiritual or moral journeys.
It's the default mode.
Right. It is the realm of human effort. On the active path, you are the engine. You are actively trying to meditate. You are actively trying to be a good person. You are striving for virtue. You are consciously choosing to do good deeds, like the midwives choosing to save the babies.
They're doing the work.
Yes, it is noble, it is necessary, and it is entirely rooted in your own agency and your own will. You are doing all the heavy lifting.
But the reward for the midwives doing that heavy moral lifting wasn't more strength to keep lifting. Their reward, the houses, was being elevated to the passive path.
The total shift.
And the passive path is where things get truly mystical. On the passive path, you cease to be the engine, you become the vessel.
You let go.
You stop acting out of your own calculated will, your own desire to be righteous, and you allow yourself to be entirely animated and guided by the divine. You let go of the steering wheel. Guyon argues that this profound state of passivity is a gift given to those who are docile and courageous enough to realize that their own active efforts, no matter how noble, will never be enough to achieve true union.
It is the shift from rowing a boat with all your strength to finally putting up a sail and letting the wind carry you.
Oh, I love that imagery. Rowing versus sailing.
But while the midwives are experiencing this incredible transition to the passive path, the environment around them is deteriorating rapidly. Pharaoh realizes his covert plan failed.
The midwives didn't play ball.
Right. They didn't quietly eliminate the threat. So he drops the pretense entirely and issues a horrific public decree to all his people. Every boy that is born to the Hebrews you must throw to the river, but let every girl live.
The covert operation becomes overt persecution. The text observes that the enemy, which Guyon identifies as the prince of this world, the ultimate adversarial force, realizes that a light touch isn't going to work. The inward life is just too resilient.
So the strategy shifts to absolute annihilation.
Yes, the command to throw the boys into the river is the ultimate attempt to smother the path of self-abandonment entirely. In her framework, the river isn't just water. It represents exposure to absolute peril.
Total vulnerability.
It is extreme temptation, vicious public defamation, and a state of certain, unavoidable psychological or social death.
Meanwhile, the contrast is stark. The text reiterates that the girls, the archetype of the self-interested, active, safe believers, are left completely unharmed.
They're fine.
They face no public slander. They face no extreme temptation. They are entirely safe from the river. Why? Because they pose absolutely no threat to the ego-driven structures of the world.
And Guyon adds a deeply cynical yet incredibly observant detail here. She notes that very often these spiritually weak individuals who are spared the river aren't just left alone. They are actively elevated to positions of power by the worldly system, specifically so they can be used to destroy others.
They become tools of the state.
Exactly. They appear incredibly strong to the outside world because they have societal approval, they have wealth, they have the backing of the pharaohs of their time, but internally, fundamentally, they remain hollow and weak.
It is a profound commentary on the mechanics of societal reward. The systems of the world consistently reward those who play the game safely, who fiercely protect their own interests and manage their own PR perfectly.
Cultivate the brand.
Right. And those exact same systems will actively seek to drown anyone who challenges that paradigm with radical, unvarnished authenticity and total self-abandonment.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the arrival of the most famous child to ever face that river. This brings us to a critical turning point in the source material, looking at the beginning of chapter 2.
The entrance of Moses.
The narrative introduces a man and a woman from the house of Levi who have a son. The mother sees that her newborn is uniquely beautiful, and she manages to hide him for 3 months. But eventually, the sheer volume of the persecution makes it impossible to keep him hidden anymore.
The walls are closing in.
She knows the authorities are coming, so she makes a choice that defies every maternal instinct. She weaves a papyrus basket, coats it with tar and pitch to make it watertight, places her baby inside, and pushes him out into the reeds along the bank of the Nile. And the baby's sister, Miriam, stands at a distance to see what will happen to him.
Here's where it gets really interesting in Guyon's interpretation. She views Moses right from his first breath as a child of providence.
A child of providence.
He's a figure destined by an unalterable divine decree to lead and liberate. But look at the context of his arrival. He isn't born into a palace with trumpets sounding. He is born into a meat grinder. It is a time of mass, systemic slaughter.
Absolute chaos.
Guyon notes that the divine gave this child a striking physical beauty specifically to compel his mother to hide him, to delay his exposure to the river for as long as humanly possible.
To buy him time.
Right. And she draws a direct, unmistakable parallel here between the infancy of Moses and the infancy of Jesus, noting that just as innocent children were martyred around the time of Moses' birth, the exact same pattern of innocent slaughter occurred under King Herod when Christ was born.
The slaughter of the innocents.
The arrival of ultimate truth always triggers a violent, desperate purge from the ruling powers.
Here's where we really need to examine the psychological weight of her interpretation. Let's look at that basket. A mother takes her infant, places him in a woven basket, and pushes him out into a river that is literally famous for drowning Hebrew babies.
Yeah.
A river that, historically speaking, was teeming with crocodiles and deadly currents.
It's a nightmare scenario.
Guyon does not romanticize this. She doesn't call it a cute little ark. She calls that basket a living coffin.
The phrase living coffin is devastating.
It really is.
It perfectly encapsulates the dual nature of the inward path. You are alive, but you are entirely encased in the mechanisms of death and total helplessness.
A living coffin.
Guyon analyzes the profound psychology of the mother in this moment. The mother is forced to yield to a superior tyrannical power. She cannot fight Pharaoh's army single-handedly, but in her absolute powerlessness, she demonstrates a radical wisdom.
How so?
She places her trust entirely and solely in the divine, completely bypassing any reliance on human pity or intervention. She recognizes, intuitively, a fundamental and terrifying law of Guyon's spiritual framework.
And what is that law?
That all true children of providence must pass through the waters of death.
I have to play devil's advocate here again, because this is where the philosophy feels incredibly severe. Why? Why does the divine require this terrifying, traumatic passage? If Moses is the chosen savior, why not just blind the guards? Why not create a force field around the house? Why require an infant to be placed in a living coffin on a river of death?
It is the central paradox of her entire theology, and it addresses the very core of human ego. Guyon argues explicitly that it is only in circumstances of extreme, inescapable peril, when a situation is utterly hopeless by every human metric, that the mindset and practice of true self-abandonment can actually take root and stand firm.
It requires hopelessness.
Think about it. If the mother could have just kept him safely tucked away in a crib, relying on her own cleverness to hide him, there would be no need for absolute radical abandonment. The ego would still believe it is in control.
I'm a great hider.
Exactly. It is only when all human agency is violently stripped away, when you are reduced to a helpless infant floating in a living coffin on a hostile river, that the ego finally breaks. And it is only in that vacuum of human control that the divine is pleased to manifest its goodness through unprecedented paradigm-shifting miracles. The extreme peril isn't a punishment. It is the prerequisite for the miracle.
It is the ultimate expression of having zero control. Imagine the sister, Miriam, watching from the riverbank. Guyon asks, what could she realistically expect to see other than her infant brother being swallowed by the waves or eaten alive?
Nothing else makes sense logically.
Death seemed like an absolute mathematical certainty. You are adrift, you have no oars, you cannot steer the basket, you cannot fight the undercurrent. You are entirely, terrifyingly passive. And yet, Guyon argues that it is exactly in that precise moment of total surrender, of literal physical abandonment, that providence finally moves.
And when providence moves, in Guyon's framework, it operates with supreme, almost mocking irony toward the powers of the world.
It really does.
Look at how the rescue actually happens. Pharaoh's daughter, the princess of the oppressive regime, comes down to bathe in the river. She spots the basket in the reeds and has her attendants fetch it. She opens it, sees the crying child, and immediately recognizes it is a Hebrew baby.
The enemy's child.
This is one of the very infants her own father has ordered to be exterminated. Yet she feels an overwhelming pity and decides, in an instant, to defy the supreme law of the land and keep him.
The subversion here is incredible. The sister runs up to the princess and casually asks, hey, do you want me to go get one of the Hebrew women to nurse this baby for you?
Just casually walking up to the princess.
Right. The princess agrees. So Miriam runs home and gets Moses' actual biological mother.
Right.
And the Egyptian princess looks at the mother and says, take this baby and nurse him for me and I will pay you. It is an absolute masterpiece of divine irony.
The oppressor paying the oppressed to raise the savior.
Yes. The exact decree that Pharaoh designed to destroy the Hebrews is hijacked by Providence to plant the Hebrews' future liberator directly into the royal palace. And to top it off, the oppressive regime is literally financing the child's survival by paying his own mother to nurse him.
Guyon views this as a flawless, elegant execution of a divine plan. It proved that the divine can orchestrate the most chaotic, hostile elements to achieve its appointed end. But she attaches a very strict, vital condition to this survival.
A condition.
She argues that if an individual is born into the spiritual life by providence and begins their journey through an act of total abandonment, like Moses being pushed out in the basket, their entire life must continue in that exact same posture.
They can't take the wheel back.
Precisely. If they survive the river and then decide to take the wheel back, relying on their own cleverness and straying from that path of absolute passivity, their initial survival means nothing. The mother is brought back into the picture not just for physical nourishment, but to nurture him spiritually, to keep him anchored in the inward path.
She builds his foundation.
Right? She builds his internal foundation so strong that later in life, neither the seductive wealth of the Egyptian royal court nor the lethal dangers of the desert can shake him.
This brings us to the duality of Moses, which is a crucial concept for you, the listener, to grasp. Guyon notes that Moses grows up living a double life. Outwardly, he is a prince of Egypt.
He looks the part.
He possesses the wealth, he wears the royal garments, he eats the delicacies, he likely speaks with an Egyptian accent, and he moves through the highest echelons of a secular, oppressive society. But inwardly, fundamentally, he is a Hebrew. He is harboring this vast, profound, radical internal life that is completely invisible to the people throwing banquets for him.
And Guyon uses this stark duality to make a much broader, timeless point about how we judge spiritual depth. She quotes the Apostle Paul from Romans chapter 2, verses 28 and 29, noting that a true Jew is one inwardly, and that true spiritual marking is a matter of the heart, by the Spirit, not by adherence to an outward written code.
It's all internal.
She challenges her readers to look at the world around them. How many people do you interact with every day who live seemingly ordinary, entirely secular lives? They work a corporate job, they wear the uniform of the culture, they live like Egyptians, yet inwardly, they possess immense, unfathomable treasures of grace.
That is such a necessary corrective to our constant need to judge people by their exterior. We see someone living a conventional life, and we automatically assume they lack depth or philosophical rigor.
We judge the book by the cover constantly.
Guyon is warning us. You have no idea what living coffin that person survived to get where they are. You have no idea what river of death they floated down. You cannot measure their inward reality by their outward compliance to societal norms.
God's judgment operates on a completely different axis than ours.
It really does. However, this intense inward reality cannot remain hidden forever. Eventually, the internal truth has to violently collide with the external world. And that brings us to the narrative of the reluctant shepherd and the ethics of defending truth, found in Exodus chapter 2, verses 11 through 22.
This is a sequence that many people find ethically and theologically difficult to reconcile.
It's a tough one.
The text tells us that Moses, now a grown man, goes out and observes the hard labor of his people. He witnesses an Egyptian mercilessly beating a Hebrew. Moses looks around, sees that no one is watching, kills the Egyptian, and hides the body in the sand.
Now, in any standard legal framework, that is a passionate, premeditated murder.
Absolutely.
How does Guyon, who is preaching a gospel of total passivity and self-abandonment, handle her protagonist committing a homicide?
She filters it entirely through her allegorical lens. In her framework, she does not view this act as a simple loss of temper or standard murder. She frames it as the precise execution of divine justice.
Okay, divine justice.
For Guyon, the Egyptian in this moment is not just a man. He represents an active, lethal enemy of divine truth. She argues that Moses was operating purely within the will of God, destroying an agent of oppression. She sees this single violent act as a localized foreshadowing of the grand systemic destruction that will eventually fall upon the entire rebellious state of Egypt. Moses is no longer just hiding his inward life. He has stepped into his role as the active protector of the flock.
But his transition to protector is immediately complicated. The very next day, Moses tries to intervene in a fight between two Hebrews. He tries to act as a peacemaker, but they violently reject him.
They turn on him.
They challenge his authority, asking, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Are you planning to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Moses realizes his secret is out. He realizes that Pharaoh will inevitably hear of the murder, and he is forced to flee into the desert to save his life. Guyon focuses intensely on the mechanics of the sequence to outline what she calls the rule of faithfulness.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the rule of faithfulness is her ethical compass for how a mystic is supposed to operate in a physical, hostile world.
How does that work?
It establishes a baseline. A faithful friend of God, someone truly walking the inward path, normally stays completely hidden. They live an ordinary, quiet life. They do not seek a platform, they do not crave the spotlight, and they do not pick unnecessary fights. They are perfectly content in their hiddenness.
As they blend in.
However, there is a massive caveat. When absolute truth is openly attacked, or when circumstances create an absolute undeniable necessity to declare whose side they are on, the hidden mystic must step out of the shadows.
They have to engage.
Guyon insists that in those rare moments they must defend the truth violently and completely, regardless of the cost to their reputation, their social standing, or even their physical life.
It is the paradox of the warrior mystic. You remain completely passive when your own ego is insulted. You take the slight, you endure the mockery, but the exact moment objective truth or the innocent are threatened, you throw your entire existence on the line to defend them.
That's the rule of faithfulness.
Moses didn't want to blow his cover. He didn't want to be a fugitive hunted by the most powerful army on earth. But the truth, represented by the bleeding Hebrew, was under lethal attack, and he was ethically obligated by his inward reality to act.
And Guyon notes that this defense of truth always carries a heavy price.
It always costs something.
It almost always brings severe persecution from the enemies of the public good. Moses loses everything. He loses his royal status, his wealth, his home, and he flees to the barren land of Midian. But it is in this exile that we encounter a profoundly rich, recurring motif in mystical literature, the well.
The well in Midian.
If we pull back and look at the broader architecture of ancient philosophy and theology, the well is never just a hole in the ground. It is the locus of life, truth, and revelation.
Water is life.
Moses arrives in Midian, exhausted and exiled, and sits down by a well. The 7 daughters of Reuel, the priest of Midian, arrive to draw water for their father's flocks. But rival shepherds arrive, assert their physical dominance, and aggressively drive the women away.
Bullies at the well.
Moses, operating once again under that rule of faithfulness, refuses to be a bystander to injustice. He stands up, drives off the rival shepherds, rescues the women, and ensures their flock is watered. Guyon points out that this is the defining characteristic of anyone chosen for true ministry. Their work always begins with ensuring the flock has access to pure water.
But Guyon makes a very careful distinction about Moses' role here. She says he isn't just a localized hero, he is acting as the universal shepherd, a direct foreshadowing of Jesus as the ultimate caretaker of souls.
The ultimate provider.
And she uses this scene at the well to define the 2 mandatory job requirements of a true shepherd. First, you have to possess the strength and the willingness to actually draw the water, which represents pulling up pure, unadulterated spiritual truth from the depths.
Which takes effort.
It does, but that isn't enough. The second requirement is that you have to be willing to physically and spiritually fight to protect the flock from bad shepherds.
Exactly. And who are these bad shepherds? Guyon states clearly that a true shepherd must protect the vulnerable from ignorant, jealous pastors who actively try to block access to the source.
Gatekeepers again.
Think back to the Egyptians from chapter 1, the supposedly enlightened religious leaders who wanted to kill the inward life. These aggressive shepherds at the well in Midian are a different manifestation of that exact same archetype.
They just wear different clothes.
They're the gatekeepers. They're the religious hoarders who want to control who gets to drink, who want to monopolize the truth for their own power and profit. Moses stepping in to fight them off is a profound theological statement. Access to the divine source is a universal right, and the true shepherd will fight the institution to ensure the sheep get the water they need.
And Guyon offers a really beautiful, reassuring promise to her readers embedded in this scene. She says that no matter how desolate your current spiritual landscape is, no matter how oppressive, ignorant, or controlling your current pastors or leaders might be, if you are faithfully and honestly seeking the inward path, providence will not leave you to die of thirst.
God provides a Moses.
Yes, the divine will always provide a Moses for you. It will orchestrate a true shepherd to arrive, drive away the gatekeepers, and provide you with access to the living water.
Following the rescue, the daughters return home to their father, Reuel, who is also known as Jethro. The text notes that they return unusually quickly, and when Reuel asks why, they explain they were saved by an Egyptian who watered their flock.
They still think he's Egyptian.
Right, the outward appearance remains. Reuel rebukes them for leaving him outside, invites Moses in, and Moses agrees to stay. He effectively transitions from an Egyptian prince to a Midianite shepherd, and during this time, he marries one of Reuel's daughters, Zipporah.
Let's talk about Zipporah.
Guyon pauses the narrative here to pay very special attention to Zipporah. She doesn't view her as a secondary character. She describes Zipporah as the archetype of the ideal, loyal companion on the inward path. She wasn't just a spouse. She profoundly understood Moses' intense spiritual calling. She shared his vision and acted as an equal partner in contributing to this new spiritual generation.
The concept of spiritual partnership is vital here because walking the inward path is incredibly isolating.
Extremely lonely.
Having someone who understands the architecture of what you are building internally is a massive grace. They have a son, and Moses names him Gershom, which translates to, I have become a foreigner in a foreign land.
A permanent exile.
It's a haunting acknowledgement of his permanent psychological exile. But Guyon highlights a very specific moment involving Zipporah. When she gives birth to their second son, Eliezer, she doesn't boast about her own strength. She praises God, saying, My father's God was my helper. He saved me from the sword of Pharaoh.
Guyon underlines this reaction in red ink.
Why is that so important?
She argues that the instinct to attribute all successes, all life, and all positive outcomes entirely to the divine is the absolute, undeniable mark of a person who's been genuinely enlightened by a living faith.
It is the ultimate diagnostic test for the inward path we've been tracking.
Have you actually abandoned yourself, or are you still playing a spiritual ego game?
Right.
When you truly abandon yourself, the instinct to take credit evaporates. You don't look around and say, look at the incredible family I built through my hard work, or look at the profound mystical insights I've achieved through my rigorous meditation.
It's never about I.
You recognize at a cellular level that every single breath, every single success, every single moment of clarity is a direct manifestation of divine providence. Ascribing the help entirely to God isn't false modesty. It is, as Jan insists, simply acknowledging the fundamental reality of existence. It is proper and right.
So Moses has seemingly found a permanent pocket of peace. He is living quietly in Midian, he has a partner who understands his soul, he is shepherding a literal flock, and he has fully embraced his hidden life.
He is off the grid entirely. But meanwhile, back in the sprawling empire of Egypt, the geopolitical and spiritual tectonic plates are shifting violently. The oppression hasn't ceased, it has compounded.
It's getting worse.
And this unbearable pressure in Egypt is about to trigger what I believe is the most profound, challenging, and rigorous theological breakdown in Guyon's entire manuscript. This brings us to the climax of our deep dive, examining the three towering pillars of the inward life found in Exodus chapter 2, verses 23 through 25.
The historical text sets the stage with a somber transition. It tells us that over the course of those many years, the king of Egypt finally died. But the death of the tyrant did not bring liberation.
The system survived him.
The Israelite slavery continued unabated. They groaned under the immense, crushing weight of their bondage, and they cried out for help. And the text says that their cry went up to God. God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God looked upon the Israelites and was profoundly concerned for them. So what does this all mean? Let's dig into the mechanics of what Guyon does with this passage. Why does the text specifically, meticulously list those three ancient patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, at the exact moment the Israelites are pushed to their absolute psychological breaking point?
For Guyon, this isn't just the narrator checking the genealogical boxes.
No, she never reads it that simply.
She argues that these three men are not merely ancestors, they are the architectural blueprints for the soul. She maps these three figures onto the three absolute requirements, the three non-negotiable stages you must pass through to achieve final union with the divine.
Let's take them one by one, because each one is more demanding than the last. The first stage, represented by Abraham, is what she terms naked faith.
Naked faith is a rigorous, deeply uncompromising concept. We have to understand how she defines it. It does not mean a warm, fuzzy feeling of belief.
Not at all.
Guyon defines naked faith as the absolute necessity of believing without ever asking for a sign. But it demands even more than that. It means holding on to your belief completely independent of human logic, entirely independent of rationale, and completely devoid of any intellectual or emotional support system. It is faith stripped of all comforting accessories.
This is where modern audiences, myself included, will experience massive friction with her philosophy. We are fundamentally conditioned to demand data.
We want proof.
We want logic models. If we are going to invest our time, our energy, or our belief into a system, we want a guaranteed return on investment. We want the GPS to show us the destination before we put the car in drive.
We want to see the whole route.
Right. Guyon is looking at that modern desire and saying, no, that is the active path, that is ego. Naked faith means stripping all the data away. It is driving at midnight, without headlights, without a map, and without the reassuring voice telling you to turn left in 500 feet. You just have to blindly, absolutely trust that the road continues beneath your tires.
And we have to ask, is that dangerous? Because blind obedience is the hallmark of cults and psychological manipulation.
It sounds risky.
But Guyon would argue that naked faith is not about blind obedience to an institution. Remember, she distrusts the religious establishment entirely. Naked faith is an internal anchor. It is the realization that the divine is so infinitely vast that the human intellect is completely incapable of mapping it.
We can't comprehend it.
If you rely on your logic to understand God, you are worshiping a God small enough to fit inside your own brain. Naked faith is the courage to step outside the boundaries of human comprehension and trust the darkness.
And just when you think you've wrestled naked faith to the ground, she introduces the second pillar. If Abraham was difficult, Isaac is devastating.
Devastating is the right word?
She maps the figure of Isaac to the concept of pure consecration. She defines this as the ultimate sacrifice. But she is very careful to clarify what kind of sacrifice is actually required. She isn't talking about writing a check to charity or giving up your weekends to volunteer or donating your old clothes. Guyon says pure consecration requires giving up your very being.
Let's look at what she actually means by giving up your being in practice, because it is an incredibly radical psychological dismantling. She specifies that you must lay down all your natural traits on the altar, your personality, your driving ambitions, your innate talents, your intellect. You must yield all of them.
Everything that makes you you.
But she pushes it even further into terrifying territory. She argues that you must also lay down the very gifts you have received through grace.
This is the part that just blew my mind. Giving up your grace. Why on earth would you have to sacrifice the spiritual gifts God gave you?
Because of the insidious nature of the spiritual ego. Guyon understood that the ego is a shapeshifter.
It adapts.
If you successfully strip away your worldly pride in your wealth or your looks, the ego will simply latch onto your spirituality. You become proud of your humility.
Look how humble I am.
Exactly. You become attached to your profound moments of enlightenment. You start identifying as the virtuous one or the devout one. Guyon says you cannot cling to any of it. You cannot identify with your own spiritual achievements. Pure consecration means completely violently emptying yourself of any claim to ownership over your own goodness.
So you own nothing.
You must recognize that the virtues you possess are not yours. They belong entirely to the divine, and you are merely the temporary hollow vessel holding them.
It is the absolute total annihilation of the ego, leaving no room for even a shred of self-congratulation, which leads us, inevitably, to the third and final pillar. If you survive naked faith and you survive the ego death of pure consecration, you arrive at Jacob. And Jacob represents the climax of her entire theological framework. Total abandonment.
Total abandonment is the summit of the inward exodus. Guyon defines it as a state of absolute, unmitigated poverty in the hands of God.
Poverty of the will.
And poverty here is used in its most extreme philosophical sense. It means having literally nothing of your own will remaining. Your agency is zero. It means accepting absolutely everything the divine wills for you without a single objection, without a single negotiation, and without a single exception.
No loopholes.
And she leaves no loopholes in the scope of this acceptance. She specifies that you must accept this reality internally and externally in this physical life and for all of eternity.
Internally and externally in this life and for eternity. I just want to sit with the staggering weight of that sentence. It means if your external life is subjected to the mud and the bricks of endless labor, you accept it with total peace.
You don't fight it.
If you are placed in a living coffin and pushed out onto a river of death to be slandered and ruined by society, you accept it. If you are granted moments of blinding heavenly joy, you accept it without clinging to it. But crucially, if you are plunged into absolute spiritual desolation, where you feel completely abandoned by the divine and your internal life is a dark, echoing void, you accept that too.
You do not thrash against the current.
You do not try to manifest a better reality. You become completely, utterly, radically passive to whatever the universe requires of you.
Guyon concludes her analysis by stating that God specifically remembers these three states: naked faith, pure consecration, and total abandonment, because they represent the absolute purest forms of human existence. They are the non-negotiable prerequisites for a human soul to be fully united with the divine.
The prerequisites.
It is only when an individual reaches this state of total, unbroken emptiness that the divine is finally willing to step in, shatter the chains of Egypt that oppress them, and allow them to exist in a state of pure, frictionless freedom.
It is a complete and total shock to the nervous system, isn't it? We live in an era that constantly aggressively screams at us to optimize ourselves.
Optimize, maximize, monetize.
We are told to seize control of our narratives, to hack our productivity, to manifest our own reality, to curate our personal brands, and to fight for every inch of ground. And here is Madame Guyon, staring at us across 4 centuries, calmly asserting that we have it completely, tragically backward.
We are running the wrong direction.
She is telling us that the only way to truly win the war for your soul is to surrender unconditionally.
It is the ultimate antithesis of the modern mindset. She is offering a cure that looks suspiciously like death to a culture obsessed with survival.
Let's just take a breath and look back at the immense landscape we've crossed today. We started with the paradox of the inward path, the initial burst of heavenly joy that is necessarily followed by the crushing oppression of earthly, mundane existence.
The mud and bricks.
We saw the Egyptian establishment, representing fearful religious leaders, trying to surgically assassinate the brave souls willing to walk the path of self-abandonment. We watched the midwives transition from the active path of moral effort to the passive path of divine guidance.
God making them houses.
We stood on the banks of the Nile as a mother placed her child into a living coffin, proving that the most extreme peril is the necessary birthplace of true providence. We followed Moses into exile, watching him defend the truth and act as the universal shepherd, fighting off the gatekeepers to provide pure water to the flock.
And then the pillars.
And finally, we collided with the 3 terrifying, beautiful pillars of the inward exodus: the dark road of naked faith, the ego death of pure consecration, and the ultimate radical surrender of total abandonment.
As we bring this deep dive to a close, I want to leave you with one final thought to wrestle with, building on the immense weight of Guyon's philosophy. Her source material insists, without apology, that the highest possible state of human being, total union with the divine, demands absolute passivity. It demands the complete, unreserved abandonment of your own will, your own ambition, and your own self-interest.
Total passivity.
So I ask you to consider your own life. In our frantic modern era where we are relentlessly commanding a hustle to aggressively manifest our destinies and to tightly control every variable of our existence, is the ultimate act of true rebellion and perhaps the only actual path to lasting peace, to simply stop rowing, drop the oars entirely, and let the river take you wherever it will.
Drop the oars. That is a deeply unsettling and incredibly beautiful question to carry with us. Thank you so much for joining us on this intense, rigorous, and truly profound deep dive. We hope it gave you a completely new lens through which to view the struggles, the friction, and the stillness in your own life. We wish you well as you wrestle with these concepts.
For more spiritual resources, visit lokaken.ai.